an expert survivalist known for mastering the wild, vanished without a trace during a solo expedition into the rugged Ozark Mountains. For years, his disappearance remained an unsettling mystery, marked only by the bizarre discovery of a failed rope anchor clinging to a precipice, a haunting testament to a tragedy no one could fully comprehend. The Ozark wilderness is a vast, ancient realm of whispering forests and hidden secrets. It doesn't surrender its mysteries easily, and sometimes it doesn't surrender them at all. This realization hung heavy in the heart of Dashiell Pogue as the hours bled into days in late September of 2012. His brother, Kellen Pogue, was now 5 days overdue from a planned 2-week solo trek deep within the Ozark National Forest. For a man of Kellen's experience and unwavering discipline, such tardiness wasn't merely a cause for concern. It was an anomaly, a shattering of his own rigorous code. Kellen wasn't just an outdoorsman. He was a master of self-reliance, a modern-day frontiersman who sought communion with the wild by deliberately casting off the conveniences of modern life. He ventured into the most remote and unforgiving corners of the Ozarks, seeking challenge, self-discovery, and a reconnection with a primal way of living. Kellen never carried a cell phone into the backcountry. He regarded reliance on instant communication as a crutch, a weakness that dulled one's instincts and fostered a dangerous complacency. Instead, he placed his faith in advanced GPS technology, meticulously maintained gear, and the encyclopedic knowledge he had painstakingly accumulated over a lifetime of wilderness exploration. This ingrained distrust of technology, paired with his rigorous planning, only amplified the gravity of his absence. Dashiell knew that his brother wouldn't deviate from his itinerary without a compelling reason, and the absence of any contact was a chilling testament to some unknown hardship. The two brothers, Dashiell and Kellen, had always shared a deep bond forged in the crucible of the wilderness. Both residents of the state and passionate outdoorsmen, they regularly embarked on challenging expeditions together, pushing their limits and honing their survival skills. They were masters of advanced techniques, particularly the art of foraging. For wild edibles, Kellen had an almost encyclopedic knowledge of fungi, capable of identifying even the most obscure and difficult to distinguish species. This skill required both extensive knowledge and a meticulous attention to detail, as some edible mushrooms bore a deadly resemblance to their toxic counterparts. This particular trip, however, was different. Just days before their scheduled departure, Dashiell was forced to cancel due to an unavoidable and pressing obligation at his engineering firm. The decision weighed heavily on him, as he understood how much the journey meant to both of them. Kellen, ever the stoic, was undeterred. He meticulously reorganized his supplies for a solo expedition and resolved to proceed alone. It was not a feat he hadn't accomplished before, and his self-assurance was unwavering. When Dashiell officially reported Kellen missing to the authorities, he provided them with the intricate itinerary Kellen had painstakingly crafted, a complex route that snaked its way through the most challenging and remote reaches of the Ozark National Forest. Dashiell also furnished them with a photograph, a GoPro selfie captured during a previous adventure that perfectly embodied Kellen's indomitable spirit. The image showed Kellen perched atop a sun-drenched mountain peak, grinning manically as he playfully gnawed on a shed antler. More importantly, for the purposes of the investigation, the photograph clearly depicted Kellen's standard gear: a vibrant blue and black shell jacket, durable black gloves, a heavily laden bright red hiking backpack, and a higher-resolution DSLR camera slung across his chest. Dashiell also confirmed that Kellen, as always, carried a firearm for protection against the unpredictable elements and wildlife that inhabited the Ozarks. The initial phase of the investigation commenced at the most logical point, the trailhead specified in Kellen's meticulously detailed itinerary. His vehicle, a weathered Jeep Cherokee, was located almost immediately. It was parked securely and displaying no signs of forced entry or distress. It simply stood there, cloaked in a fine layer of dust and fallen leaves, patiently awaiting a driver who had seemingly vanished into thin air. The discovery of the vehicle solidified the grim reality of the situation. Kellen Pogue was officially a missing person, swallowed whole by the vast and unforgiving expanse of the Ozark National Forest. The region, characterized by its towering bluffs, hidden caves, and thousands upon thousands of acres of dense, impenetrable woodland, immediately presented a daunting challenge to search and rescue teams. Everyone involved understood the gravity of the task ahead. finding one man, especially one as skilled at navigating off-trail as Kellen, in that labyrinthine terrain was akin to searching for a single, specific leaf on a forest floor buried under a thick blanket of foliage. The wilderness had seemingly claimed Kellen, and the silence it offered was absolute. The mobilization of search and rescue efforts was swift and comprehensive. Yet the rugged and unforgiving terrain of the Ozarks immediately exerted its dominance. The landscape isn't designed for easy passage. It is a bewildering maze of razor-sharp ridges, sudden precipitous drop-offs, and tangled undergrowth that obscures visibility and reduces even the most experienced hikers to a crawl. The initial search strategy centered squarely on the detailed itinerary Kellen had provided. Teams began meticulously tracing his planned route, clinging to the hope of discovering some early sign of his presence, a misplaced piece of gear, a telltale footprint, anything that might offer a clue to his whereabouts. The air throbbed with the relentless chop of helicopter blades slicing through the humid September air, yet the dense forest canopy rendered aerial searches largely ineffective. On the ground, canine units strained to catch a scent, but the dry, rocky terrain yielded little to their sensitive noses. Dashiell Pogue arrived at the hastily established command center within hours of the search operation's commencement. While the search and rescue teams were composed of highly trained experts in general wilderness rescue, Dashiell possessed a unique and invaluable asset, an intimate knowledge of his brother's habits, his capabilities, and his thought processes. He didn't just understand the terrain, he understood how Kellen interpreted the terrain. He began poring over the topographical maps, immediately identifying potential deviations from the planned route that Kellen would likely have taken. He pointed out areas rich in the specific types of fungi that Kellen often sought, sheer rock faces they had frequented for climbing practice, and secluded spots where they had previously established temporary survival camps. Dashiell vehemently insisted that Kellen would not have confined himself to the marked hiking trails. His stated goal was complete immersion, which meant venturing into the most challenging and untraveled corners of the backcountry. The search perimeter was expanded based on Dashiell's invaluable insights, pushing deeper into increasingly rugged and remote areas. The days dissolved into a blur of grueling grid searches. The physical toll on the searchers was immense. They navigated treacherous, steep inclines, waded across swollen creeks, and fought their way through thickets of thorny brush that tore at their clothing and skin. The sheer scale and immensity of the wilderness was overwhelming, fostering a creeping sense of despair. Hope began to wane as the initial hyperprobability areas yielded nothing. The narrative seemed to be shaping itself into another tragic tale of a hiker, however experienced, succumbing to an unforeseen accident in the wilderness. The complete absence of any trace, no discarded wrappers, no telltale footprints, no signs of a campsite, was perplexing for a man carrying such a comprehensive array of equipment. It was on the fifth day of the exhaustive search that a breakthrough, of sorts, occurred, but it was not the kind of breakthrough that anyone had dared to anticipate. A specialized high-angle rescue team was meticulously scouting a particularly treacherous section of the terrain, a rocky overlook perched precariously above a deep and narrow ravine. This area was far removed from any established trail, accessible only through a demanding combination of technical climbing and arduous bush. It was precisely the kind of terrain that Kellen actively sought out, a place where specialized skills and unwavering focus were paramount for safe passage. As the team cautiously secured their position at the edge of the overlook, one member noticed something decidedly out of place, something unusual attached to a sturdy oak tree set back slightly from the precipice. It was a rope anchor, but the configuration of the knots was strikingly distinctive, betraying a level of expertise beyond the ordinary. The team leader, recognizing the intricate complexity of the knot, immediately contacted Dashiell via radio, describing its nuances in painstaking detail. The description sent a cold surge of adrenaline through Dashiell's veins. He recognized it instantly. It was a specialized friction knot, a modified variation that Kellen himself had adapted for lowering heavy gear or executing a controlled rappel in particularly challenging conditions. It was, in essence, his signature. The discovery sent a jolt of renewed energy through the weary search teams. They had finally found a definitive trace of Kellen's presence, a tangible link to the man they sought. But the sudden surge of optimism was tragically short-lived. Rope extending from the knot told a chilling and disturbing story. It ran tautly towards the edge of the overlook, and then ended abruptly, as if severed by some unseen force. The rope hadn't been cleanly cut. It had been violently severed under extreme tension. The end was severely frayed, the individual fibers stretched, torn, and partially melted. The wear patterns suggested a sudden, catastrophic failure, a force far exceeding the rope's rated breaking strength. The terrifying implication was clear. Kellen had been repelling or lowering his gear when the rope failed, sending him plummeting into the shadowed depths of the ravine below. The entire operation's focus immediately shifted to the ravine. The search was now officially designated a recovery mission rather than a rescue attempt. The atmosphere instantly transformed from one of hopeful searching to the grim and somber expectation of retrieving a body. Investigators converged on the overlook, establishing a secure perimeter. The terrain below the overlook was notoriously treacherous, a chaotic jumble of massive boulders, dense vegetation, and perpetual shadows. Accessing the bottom of the ravine required specialized equipment and hours of painstaking maneuvering. High-angle team established a new set of anchors and began the slow and deliberate descent. Their movements were methodical and cautious, reflecting the inherent danger of the terrain. They fully expected to find a grim and conclusive scene at the bottom of the ravine. They anticipated discovering Kellen's body, his distinctive red backpack, and a scattering of broken and dislodged equipment. The physical evidence of a fatal fall, the red backpack, in particular, should have been highly visible against the dark greens and browns of the ravine floor. The descent consumed the remainder of the daylight hours. The team finally reached the bottom of the ravine and began a meticulous and methodical search of the presumed impact zone. They painstakingly searched the immediate area and then expanded outwards, checking under boulders, behind thickets of dense vegetation, and in the shallow creek that meandered through the center of the ravine. The search was exhaustive, bordering on obsessive. Teams grid-searched the entire area, overturning rocks, probing the dense underbrush with poles, and scanning the ravine floor with binoculars from their vantage point on the overlook above. They found absolutely nothing. The ravine was utterly and completely empty. No body, no bright red backpack, no scattered supplies, no broken camera, not even a stray scrap of fabric or a misplaced piece of climbing gear. The ground was completely undisturbed, as if no one had ever been there, as if no catastrophic event had ever occurred. The absence of any and all evidence baffled the investigators and tortured the physical reality of the situation presented an almost impossible paradox. The frayed knot and the severed rope were definitive, irrefutable proof that Kellen had been at the overlook and that a catastrophic event had indeed transpired. Yet, the empty ravine directly contradicted this narrative. If he had fallen from such a height, where was the evidence? A fall from that distance, burdened with the weight of his gear, would have been devastating, almost certainly fatal. It was virtually inconceivable that such an impact would leave no trace behind. The physics of the situation simply didn't make any sense. Investigators began grappling with alternative theories, however improbable they seemed. Had the rope failed while he was in the process of lowering his gear, and had he somehow managed to recover it and move on? This seemed highly unlikely. The precise configuration of the knot suggested that he was suspended from the rope himself when it failed. Had he fallen and somehow survived, then managed to walk out of the ravine? If so, why hadn't he contacted anyone? And how could he have sustained such a fall without leaving any trace behind? The mystery only deepened the longer they analyzed. The scene, the overlook itself, was meticulously scrutinized for any additional clues. They searched for footprints, bloodstains, anything to indicate what had happened immediately after the rope failed. But the hard, rocky ground yielded nothing. Investigators examined the frayed end of the severed rope again and again. Could it have been intentionally damaged to mimic the appearance of a failure? But the wear pattern was consistent with a sudden tension overload, not a deliberate act of sabotage. The search continued for several more weeks, expanding outwards from the overlook in concentric circles. The efforts were exhaustive, covering hundreds of square miles of some of the most difficult and unforgiving terrain in the entire region. But the trail ended abruptly at the edge of the overlook. The frayed knot remained the solitary clue, a cryptic punctuation mark in an otherwise empty and indecipherable narrative. By late October of 2012, the weather in the Ozarks began its inevitable turn towards the harsher realities of winter. The days grew noticeably shorter, The temperatures plummeted, and the looming threat of winter storms cast a long shadow over the search operation. The logistical challenges of maintaining a large-scale search became insurmountable. The active search was officially scaled back. Resources were diverted to other, more pressing cases. Volunteers returned home, and the case of Kellen Pogue grew cold. Dashiell was left to grapple with the inexplicable disappearance of his brother. The mystery, anchored by the haunting image of a frayed rope dangling forlornly over an empty void. The wilderness had offered a tantalizing clue but stubbornly refused to provide a definitive answer. The years that followed Kellen Pogue's disappearance were a slow and agonizing erosion of hope for Dashiell. The case remained officially open but inactive, relegated to the ever-growing files of unsolved mysteries. The mystery of the frayed knot and the empty ravine became something of a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered among hikers and hunters who ventured into the remoter corners of the Ozarks. Dashiell continued to search independently, returning to the wilderness time and again, driven by a desperate need for the answers that the landscape stubbornly refused to yield. The wilderness, however, operates on its own inscrutable timeline, utterly indifferent to human suffering. 3 years, the Ozark wilderness held its breath, holding Kellen's secret close. 3 years, Dashiell Pogue lived with annoying uncertainty, the echo of a severed rope, the emptiness of a ravine. The case of Kellen Pogue, the survivalist who vanished, faded from headlines, becoming another cold case file gathering dust in a rural sheriff's office. But the wilderness, as it often does, had other plans. It wasn't ready to relinquish its secrets completely. It just kept them biding its time, until the right moment, the right people, stumbled upon a clue so bizarre, so improbable. It would reignite the embers of a dying hope. The summer of 2015, a research team, far removed from the well-worn trails and tourist hotspots, was knee-deep in the muddy reality of the Ozarks' aquatic ecosystems. This wasn't a casual nature walk. This was serious biological fieldwork, the kind that requires meticulous observation, unwavering patience, and a willingness to brave swarms of mosquitoes, poisonous snakes, and the general discomfort of prolonged immersion in a humid, unforgiving environment. This team, led by Dr. Evelyn Reed, a seasoned biologist with a passion for reptiles and amphibians, and her younger colleague, a recent graduate named Ben Carter, were conducting a comprehensive survey of the region's turtle population. Their mission, to document species distribution, assess habitat quality, and collect data on the overall health and diversity of these often overlooked creatures. Their focus that day was a particularly isolated creek, a tributary of a larger river system, accessible only by a strenuous hike through dense, tangled undergrowth. The air was thick with the smell of decaying leaves and damp earth, the silence broken only by the drone of insects and the occasional call of a distant bird. They were miles from the nearest road, operating under the assumption that they were the only humans for miles, truly alone with the untamed heart of the Ozarks. As they waded through the murky water, their eyes scanning the banks for signs of turtle activity, Ben spotted something unusual. Partially submerged in the shallows, basking in a rare patch of sunlight that filtered through the dense canopy, was a massive alligator snapping turtle. These prehistorically clicking creatures are apex predators of the waterways, ancient relics that seem to have crawled straight out of the Earth's distant past. This one was particularly large, its shell encrusted with algae and mud, its powerful jaws capable of delivering a crushing bite. Dr. Reed, ever the dedicated scientist, immediately signaled for the team to approach cautiously. She wanted to document the specimen, take measurements, and collect data for their study. But as they drew closer, Ben noticed something strange. On the turtle's carapace, the upper shell, there were markings, deliberate scratches that cut through the layer of grime and algae. At first glance, they appeared to be natural, perhaps the result of a territorial dispute with another turtle, or damage from rocks and debris. But as they got closer, the truth became undeniable. These weren't random scratches. These were deliberate markings, carefully etched into the shell with a sharp object. They were rough and uneven, but undeniably intentional, a message carved into the very being of this ancient reptile. Curiosity piqued, Dr. Reed carefully cleaned away some of the mud and algae, revealing a series of numbers and letters crudely carved into the turtle's shell. It took a moment to decipher the crude carvings, but soon the message was clear: geographic coordinates, 35 degrees, 52 minutes, 18 seconds north. 92 degrees, 11 minutes, 35 seconds west. The realization struck them with the force of a lightning bolt. These weren't random markings. This was a message, a desperate plea for help, entrusted to the slow, steady journey of a turtle. Who would carve coordinates onto a turtle, and why? The implications were both bizarre and unsettling. Was this a prank, a cruel hoax perpetrated by some twisted individual, or was it a genuine cry for help, a last desperate act of someone lost and alone in the wilderness? The sheer oddity of the situation demanded investigation. The team retreated to their base camp, their minds racing with possibilities. That evening, under the dim glow of their camp lanterns, they plotted the coordinates on their topographical maps. The location was deep in the wilderness, several days' trek from their current position, far off their planned survey route. The terrain between them and the coordinates was notoriously rugged, a maze of steep ridges, dense forests, and treacherous creeks. A heated debate ensued. Dr. Reed, ever the pragmatist, argued for caution. They were on a tight schedule. Their research grant depended on them completing their survey within a specific time frame. To divert their resources to investigate a potentially bogus message would be irresponsible, she argued. It could be a wild goose chase, a waste of time and energy that would jeopardize their entire project. Ben, however, was adamant. He couldn't shake the feeling that this message was real, that someone out there was desperately in need of help. He felt a moral obligation to follow the lead, to investigate the coordinates, no matter the cost. The argument raged late into the night, fueled by coffee and a sense of urgency. The deciding factor came down to their research schedule. As fate would have it, their planned route for the following week would take them relatively close to the area indicated by the coordinates. They could make a detour, a slight adjustment to their itinerary, without completely derailing their research project. They decided to investigate, driven by a mixture of scientific curiosity and a profound sense of responsibility. The trek to the coordinates was grueling. They bushwhacked through dense undergrowth, navigated steep inclines, and waded across countless streams, battling swarms of insects and the relentless heat and humidity. The terrain was as unforgiving as the map suggested, a true test of their physical and mental endurance. But as they drew closer to their destination, their anticipation grew. What would they find? A hoax, a false alarm, or something far more sinister? On the afternoon of the third day, they reached the coordinates. The location was a secluded area near a rocky bluff, heavily wooded and overgrown with vegetation. At first glance, there was nothing there, no sign of human activity, no indication that anyone had ever been in this remote spot. They began a systematic search of the area, spreading out to cover the ground more effectively, their eyes scanning every inch of the landscape for any clue. And then, Ben spotted it. Concealed beneath a thicket of brush, nestled against the base of the bluff, was a makeshift campsite. It was overgrown and weathered, clearly abandoned for a significant period of time. Branches, leaves, and moss concealed a small clearing that was barely visible to the naked eye. As they moved closer, they discovered the first definitive clue, a backpack. It was faded and tattered, partially decomposed by the elements, but the color was still discernible, a distinctive bright red. The backpack, still caked in mud, and leaves sat against the base of the bluff. The color alone was enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through them. This wasn't just any lost hiker. This was evidence of a tragedy, a sign that someone had been here, struggling for survival. They examined the backpack cautiously. It was completely empty. The contents had been removed, leaving only the bare shell of the pack. The straps were frayed, the fabric torn, bearing the marks of prolonged exposure to the elements. The discovery was chilling. If this was a survival situation, why was the backpack empty? Had the contents been consumed, scavenged by animals, or perhaps even taken by someone else? A sense of unease settled over them. This wasn't just a lost hiker. This was something more complicated, something more disturbing. They continued searching the area, moving with a newfound sense of urgency. And then, etched into the smooth rock face of the bluff, they found a second message. The carving was more precise than the etching on the turtle, suggesting it had been made with more time and care, perhaps with a knife or a sharp rock dot. The message was clear and unequivocal. Kellen, Pogue, 9, junho de 1987, heading south. The name confirmed their worst fears. This was a remnant of someone lost, desperate, and possibly long gone. They documented the scene meticulously, taking photographs of the backpack, the etching, and the surrounding area. They gathered samples of soil and vegetation, hoping to find further clues. The atmosphere at the campsite was heavy, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a crow. They felt a profound sense of sadness, a connection to the unknown person who had once occupied this space. Struggling to survive in the face of overwhelming odds, they completed their survey, working with a somber awareness of the story they had unknowingly uncovered. Several days later, they hiked out to the nearest ranger station, their packs laden with samples, and their minds filled with questions. They turned in the empty backpack, still caked in dirt and debris. Ben insisted on speaking with the ranger on duty, a man named Tobin Jenkins. He recounted their findings, starting with the turtle and ending with the discovery of the campsite. Ranger Jenkins listened intently, his expression growing increasingly serious. The name Kellen Pogue triggered a flicker of recognition, a memory buried deep in the archives of his mind. It was a name he hadn't heard in years, but one that carried a significant weight in the local community. He couldn't quite place it immediately, but the details of the story, the remote location, the desperation, resonated with a cold case that had haunted the Park Service for years. Later that evening, after the biologists had left, Ranger Jenkins searched the cold case database. He entered the name Kellen Pogue. The match was immediate. The file detailed the disappearance of an experienced survivalist in 2012, the mystery of the frayed knot, and the exhaustive search that had yielded nothing. Ranger Jenkins picked up the phone. The discovery changed everything. Kellen Pogue had not died in the ravine. He had survived, and the message on the turtle was his desperate plea for help. The call from Ranger Jenkins reached Dashiell Pogue late that evening. The news was staggering, a seismic shift in the narrative that had defined the last 3 years of his life. Kellen had been alive. He had traveled dozens of miles from the Overlook, survived for an indeterminate amount of time, and left a trail of clues that defied explanation. The discovery of the backpack and the etching confirmed his presence, but it also deepened the mystery of his disappearance. The investigation, long dormant, was immediately reopened with renewed urgency. State police investigators were dispatched to the remote campsite, guided by Ranger Jenkins and the coordinates provided by the biologists. The journey itself was a testament to the remoteness of the location. The winding dirt roads, the dense forests, the treacherous terrain, all conspired to keep the campsite hidden from the outside world. When the investigators arrived, they began the meticulous process of documenting and analyzing the scene. Every detail was scrutinized for clues about Kellen's state of mind and his movements. The first challenge was understanding the journey itself. When investigators analyzed the coordinates etched on the turtle, they realized the campsite was dozens of miles away from the Overlook where the frayed knot had been found. How had Kellen traveled that far through some of the most rugged terrain in the Ozarks? And what happened at the Overlook that led him to abandon his planned route and head in a completely different direction? The mystery of the frayed knot remained central to the investigation. If Kellen hadn't fallen, what caused the rope failure? The prevailing theory shifted. Perhaps the rope failure occurred while he was lowering his gear, sending his supplies plummeting into the ravine while he remained at the Overlook. This would explain the empty ravine. The gear was lost, but Kellen was safe. It would also explain his subsequent actions. Suddenly deprived of his essential equipment, he would have been forced into a survival situation, relying on his skills and the limited supplies he carried on his person. But this theory contradicted the discovery of the red backpack at the campsite. If the backpack had fallen into the ravine, how was it recovered and transported dozens of miles only to be found empty? The logistics didn't make sense. The message on the turtle became a critical piece of the puzzle, offering insights into Kellen's situation. The etching of the coordinates suggested a desperate attempt to communicate his location, but it also implied a crucial detail about his equipment. Kellen was an expert navigator, equipped with an advanced GPS unit. If the GPS was functional, he would have been able to navigate out of the wilderness easily. The fact that he resorted to carving coordinates onto a slow-moving turtle suggested that his GPS was damaged or lost. Investigators hypothesized that Kellen likely remembered his last known coordinates before the device failed, or perhaps the device provided a final reading before shutting down completely. In a moment of desperation, he etched them onto the turtle, hoping that it would eventually travel downstream and be discovered. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble in a situation where options were rapidly dwindling. The use of an alligator, snapping turtle was also significant. These creatures are known for their slow movement and their tendency to stay within a localized watershed. Kellen would have known this, choosing a messenger that was slow but reliable. The state of the backpack, completely empty, raised immediate concerns. If Kellen had managed to retain his backpack after the incident at the Overlook, the supplies inside would have been his lifeline. Why was it empty? Had he consumed all his supplies, indicating a prolonged period of starvation, or had they been taken from him? The empty pack suggested a dire situation characterized by scarcity and desperation. The message etched on the rock face, heading south, provided the next logical step for the investigation. The search resumed, focusing on the trajectory south from the campsite. The challenge, however, was immense. They were searching for a trail that was 3 years cold, left by a man who was skilled in moving through the wilderness without leaving a trace. The search teams deployed again, facing the same grueling conditions that had defined the initial search. They moved slowly and methodically, scouring the landscape for any sign of Kellen's passage. The terrain south of the campsite was characterized by steep hills, dense forests, and numerous creeks and streams. Progress was slow, measured in meters rather than miles. The turtle had spoken, but the language was cryptic. The reopened investigation centered on the remote campsite, the last known location where Kellen Pogue was definitively confirmed to be alive. The scene itself was a puzzle box, each piece of evidence offering a glimpse into Kellen's state of mind and the circumstances surrounding his disappearance, but the pieces didn't quite fit together. The first priority was understanding the journey itself. The coordinates etched on the turtle placed the campsite dozens of miles from the Overlook, a trek through some of the most challenging terrain the Ozarks had to offer. The initial assessment focused on Kellen's physical capabilities. How had he traversed that distance, especially considering the presumed loss of essential gear at the Overlook? The condition of the campsite provided some clues. The makeshift shelter was rudimentary, constructed from fallen branches and debris, suggesting a need for immediate protection from the elements. The fire pit was ringed with stones, indicating a longer-term stay, a place where Kellen had intended to remain for a while. But it was the contents of the fire pit and the surrounding area that yielded the most intriguing and contradictory evidence. Investigators meticulously collected samples of the charred remnants, the discarded food scraps, anything that might reveal insights into Kellen's diet and his physical state. The lab analysis of the foraged remnants presented a deeply troubling picture. It confirmed that Kellen was actively using his survival skills, identifying and collecting edible plants and mushrooms. The analysis showed that he was successful, but it was not all good news. Mixed in with the edible species were traces of fungi known to be toxic if not prepared properly. These weren't just mildly irritating mushrooms. We're talking about species that could cause severe gastrointestinal distress, hallucinations, even organ failure. Fungi like the false morel, a species that requires meticulous preparation to neutralize the gerometrine toxin. Even a small oversight could have devastating consequences. The discovery of these toxic fungi introduced a sinister new theory: accidental poisoning. Could Kellen, weakened by hunger and exhaustion, have made a mistake in identifying or preparing his foraged food? The possibility hung heavy in the air. Dashiell Pogue found the theory difficult to accept. Kellen was an expert, a meticulous and knowledgeable forager. They had spent years studying mushrooms together, learning the subtle differences between edible and poisonous species. Dashiell knew his brother better than anyone. He knew how carefully Kellen approached the task of foraging, how he triple-checked his identifications, how he prepared his food with painstaking care. But Dashiell also recognized the harsh realities of survival. Prolonged exposure, lack of sleep, and the gnawing pangs of hunger could cloud even the sharpest mind. Desperation could lead to mistakes, especially in a situation where every calorie counted. The accidental poisoning theory offered a plausible explanation for some of the anomalies in Kellen's behavior. It could explain any erratic movements, any lapses in judgment, any confusion or disorientation. It could even explain why he might have failed to leave a clear trail for rescuers to follow. If he was delirious from the toxins, he might have simply wandered off into the wilderness, his survival skills compromised, ultimately succumbing to the elements. For a time, the narrative seemed to be coalescing around this theory, a tragic accident compounded by a series of unfortunate events. Kellen Pogue, the expert survivalist, had fallen victim to his own expertise, a victim of the wilderness he knew so well. But the Ozark wilderness is a master of deception. Just when you think you've unraveled its secrets, it throws another curveball. As investigators continued their meticulous search of the campsite, they stumbled upon something that shattered the accidental poisoning theory and introduced a completely new dimension to the mystery. Concealed under a pile of rocks near the perimeter of the camp, they found a small cache of discarded items. Among the debris were several specialized lithium batteries. These weren't the type of batteries you'd find in an ordinary flashlight or a child's toy. They were high-performance batteries designed for use in advanced electronic equipment, the kind of equipment used by professionals. The discovery was immediately flagged as significant. The batteries were not compatible with any of Kellen's known gear. His GPS unit used standard AA batteries. His DSLR camera used a specific type of rechargeable battery pack. These lithium batteries belonged to something else entirely. They were the type used in advanced GPS units with extended battery life, satellite phones, or other specialized equipment not typically carried by recreational hikers. The implications were profound. Further examination of the fire pit area revealed another anomaly. Amidst the charred wood and ashes, investigators found traces of a fire started using a magnesium striker and a chemical accelerant. Again, this was inconsistent with Kellen's known practices. Kellen was a traditionalist, a purist when it came to survival techniques. He preferred to use a ferro rod or even friction-based methods to start his fires. He viewed magnesium strikers and chemical accelerants as unnecessary shortcuts, tools that diminished the challenge and compromised the connection with nature. The use of these modern fire-starting aids suggested a different approach, a different set of skills, perhaps even a different person. The presence of the specialized batteries and the evidence of a different fire-starting method pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Kellen was not alone. Someone else was with him at the campsite. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Kellen's itinerary had specified a solo trip. He had not planned to meet anyone in the wilderness. Had he encountered another hiker by chance? It was possible, but the Ozarks are vast and sparsely populated, especially in the remote areas where Kellen had ventured. A chance encounter seemed unlikely, especially with someone carrying specialized electronic equipment and a penchant for modern fire-starting aids. And if he had met another hiker, why hadn't that person come forward to report? Finding a lost and injured man, the silence was suspicious, deeply suspicious. The presence of another person introduced a host of disturbing possibilities. Was this person a friend, a rescuer, or something far more sinister? Had Kellen stumbled upon someone engaged in illegal activities in the wilderness? The evidence at the campsite didn't suggest any overt conflict. There were no signs of a struggle, no bloodstains, no obvious signs of violence. The camp seemed relatively orderly, suggesting a shared space rather than a crime scene. But the fact remained, someone else was there, and that person had not come forward. The empty backpack found at the first campsite now took on a completely new significance. Had Kellen's supplies been taken by this second person? Had they consolidated their gear, sharing resources in a desperate attempt to survive, or had something more sinister occurred? The empty pack might not be evidence of starvation, but of theft, coercion, or even forced cooperation. The investigation suddenly pivoted, moving away from the accidental poisoning theory and focusing intensely on the identification of this unknown companion. The specialized batteries became the central clue, the key to unlocking the mystery. Investigators began the arduous task of tracing the origin of those batteries, hoping to identify the type of equipment they were used in and, ultimately, the person who had carried them into the wilderness. The discovery of the second person also forced a re-evaluation of the initial incident at the overlook. Had the rope failure been an accident, or had it been a deliberate act of sabotage? The frayed knot suggested an accident, a catastrophic failure under extreme tension. But the possibility of foul play could no longer be dismissed. If someone had wanted to harm Kellen, disabling his rope would have been a deadly effective method. The mystery deepened, the narrative twisting and turning like a maze. Kellen Pogue had survived the initial incident, traveled dozens of miles through the wilderness, and encountered another person. But who was this person? What was their relationship to Kellen? And what role did they play in his ultimate disappearance? The wilderness had yielded clues, but each discovery seemed to push the truth further into the shadows. The investigation was no longer a search for a lost hiker. It was a hunt for a ghost, a shadow figure lurking at the edge of the wilderness. The revelation that Kellen wasn't alone seemingly paralyzed the investigation. The trail south of the second campsite simply vanished, seemingly eaten by the dense Ozark wilderness. The narrative was dissolving into conjecture, with too many variables to make any concrete assertions. Had Kellen continued south? Did he and the second person divert to the east or west? Had Kellen even left the second campsite alive? The specialized lithium batteries, once a possible breakthrough, provided no immediate answers. Analysis confirmed they were used in high-end equipment, like satellite phones and surveying tools. But the manufacturers were unable to identify any particular consumer. The batteries were a generic brand, sold by countless retailers, without a serial number or point of purchase. The lead was a dead end. Attempts to recover data from the damaged DSLR camera also ended in disappointment. The internal components were too corroded, the memory card itself corrupted beyond repair. The hope of finding images that might reveal Kellen's final days, perhaps even capture a glimpse of the mysterious second person, evaporated. Just like the batteries, the camera proved to be another dead end. The investigation had stalled. The momentum generated by the turtle discovery quickly faded, replaced by frustration and a sense of mounting hopelessness. Investigators struggled to find a logical next step. They knew where Kellen had started. They knew the coordinates on the turtle. They knew of the campsites, and they knew someone else was out there with him. But that was all. Without a fresh piece of information to build upon, the case went cold once more. Months bled into years. Dashiell Pogue continued to apply pressure to the investigators. He knew his brother was out there somewhere. He would not rest until he learned the truth. In early 2016, driven by a desperate need for closure, the team decided to conduct a final detailed sweep of the campsite area. It was a long shot. The location had already been searched multiple times, but the wilderness is exceptionally good at hiding its secrets. This would be one last-ditch effort to bring Kellen home. The forensic team returned to the secluded hollow, the atmosphere heavy with the unsolved nature of the case. The team expanded the search grid and began methodically sifting through the soil. They examined vegetation and scrutinized every rock in the area. It was during this final exhaustive search that an investigator noticed a large upturned root ball near the fire pit. The tree had fallen years prior, its roots ripping from the earth to form a chaotic mess of dirt and wood. The root ball had been examined before, but the investigator decided to take another look, probing the deep crevices and recesses of its structure. It was here, wedged deep within the dark, caked roots, that the investigator found a small waterproof container. The container was cylindrical and made of hard plastic. It was sealed tightly and camouflaged within the dirt. It was icily mist. The discovery was immediately tagged as significant. The container was extracted and carefully opened, empty, but the container itself was a clue. Dashiell was contacted and asked to identify the object. He knew exactly what it was, a firearm cleaning kit. Kellen was meticulous in regards to maintenance of his weapons. This kit held specialized tools, brushes, and grease that kept Kellen's firearms in top condition. But it was the inside of the lid that contained the real discovery. Almost invisible against the dark plastic were faint markings. Someone had used a grease pencil, of the kind found in cleaning kits, to draw on the lid. Under specialized lighting, the marks became clear. What they uncovered wasn't a traditional map. It was a series of rudimentary drawings depicting landmarks and a trajectory. Investigators recognized the landmarks immediately. The drawings depicted a specific ridgeline, a creek confluence, and a rock formation, all located south of the campsite. The trajectory of the map pointed towards a rarely used Forest Service road on the edge of the wilderness. A map had been hidden in plain sight for 3 years. Kellen had made a final desperate attempt to reach civilization. The discovery implied that Kellen was still of sound mind when the map was created. He was navigating by landmarks, heading towards a specific destination. The rudimentary nature of the map implied that Kellen was operating with limited resources, using only what he had on hand to try and find safety. It also raised more questions about his companion. Had they created the map together, or had Kellen created it secretly, hoping to leave a trail for rescuers to follow? The hidden nature of the map suggested the latter. If Kellen was traveling with a willing companion, why hide the map? Investigators once more shifted their focus. They followed the map. They had a new direction. The trail was no longer cold. The hunt was back on. The investigation shifted focus, zeroing in on identifying the mysterious figure who had pulled Kellen from the precipice of oblivion. This second person, shrouded in anonymity, now held the key, or perhaps the shackle, to the truth. The batteries, seemingly innocuous, became the focal point. What device required such specialized power, and who would be carrying it in the remote Ozarks wilderness? Investigators embarked on a painstaking process, contacting manufacturers, consulting with outdoor gear specialists, and poring over technical manuals. They learned the batteries were commonly used in high-end GPS units designed for extended expeditions, satellite phones for emergency communication in areas with no cell service, and specialized surveying equipment utilized by geologists, surveyors, and illicit ginseng hunters. The mention of ginseng harvesters sent a jolt through the investigation. The Ozarks were notorious for illegal ginseng poaching, a lucrative black market trade driven by the plant's purported medicinal properties in some cultures. Could Kellen's disappearance be connected to this illicit activity? As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a web of suspicion and uncertainty. The image of Kellen, gaunt and weakened, juxtaposed with the clean, composed stranger, fueled their unease. Was this a chance encounter, a Samaritan offering assistance, or was it a predator seizing an opportunity? Meanwhile, the forensic team continued its meticulous examination of the recovered items. The empty cleaning kit container, initially dismissed as insignificant, underwent rigorous analysis. Under specialized lighting and magnification, faint markings were discovered on the inside of the lid. They were almost imperceptible, obscured by years of grime and wear. It was Dashel who ultimately deciphered the cryptic markings. He recognized them as a rudimentary map, scratched onto the plastic with a grease pencil, the type used to lubricate firearms. The map depicted a series of landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a confluence of two creeks, a specific bend in a rarely used Forest Service road. The discovery was a revelation, a beacon of hope piercing through the darkness. Kellen, despite his weakened state, had retained his cognitive abilities, his survival instincts kicking into high gear. He had created a hidden guide, a desperate plea for rescue concealed within an everyday object. The map indicated a trajectory, leading south, away from the second campsite and towards the periphery of the wilderness. It was a clear indication that Kellen was determined to reach civilization, to escape whatever, or whoever, was holding him captive. The team followed the map's crude directions. It wasn't easy. The terrain was unforgiving, the landmarks often obscured by dense vegetation, but they pressed on, driven by the hope that they were finally on the right track. Their persistence paid off. They emerged onto a remote Forest Service road, a narrow dirt track that wound its way through the dense forest. The road was barely used, overgrown with weeds and littered with fallen branches. The investigation transitioned from a wilderness search to a traditional manhunt. They began canvassing the area, interviewing locals, showing them the enhanced image of the second man from the motel's CCTV footage. Most of the residents were tight-lipped, wary of outsiders and distrustful of law enforcement. But one name kept surfacing in the conversations: Xavier Gyllenhaal. Gyllenhaal, it turned out, was a Belgian national who had been in the area several years prior, purportedly studying local flora and fauna. He was described as a loner, a bit eccentric, but generally harmless. However, a deeper investigation revealed a more sinister side to Gyllenhaal. He had been flagged by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for suspected involvement in illegal ginseng harvesting. The agents believed he was part of a larger smuggling operation, transporting the valuable roots out of the country. The pieces began to fall into place. Gyllenhaal, the poacher, the stranger in the wilderness. Could he be the key to unlocking the mystery of Kellen's disappearance? Driven by a renewed sense of urgency, investigators focused on locating Gyllenhaal's whereabouts. They learned he had left the Ozarks shortly after Kellen's disappearance, returning to his home country. But before they could pursue extradition, they needed more concrete evidence. They scoured the area for any trace of Gyllenhaal's presence, any clue that might link him to Kellen. It was a long shot, but they had to exhaust every possibility. Their search eventually led them to a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of a small town, the last vestige of civilization before plunging back into the wilderness. The motel was a seedy establishment, known for its cheap rates and its clientele of transient workers and drifters. The motel owner, an elderly man with a suspicious gaze, was initially uncooperative. He claimed he couldn't remember anything about a guest named Kellen Pogue, or anyone resembling the man in the photograph. Years of shady characters and quick cash transactions blurred together. Just when the investigators were about to give up, they noticed a flickering CCTV camera mounted above the motel office. The camera was old and outdated, but it was still operational. They requested the footage from late 2012, the time period when Kellen would have reached the area. The motel owner grumbled, but eventually relented. He led them to a dusty storage room filled with stacks of old VHS tapes. Hours were spent sifting through the tapes, searching for the needle in the haystack. The footage was grainy and distorted, the images barely discernible. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they found it, a fleeting glimpse of Kellen Pogue, gaunt and emaciated, being led into the motel office by a man matching Gyllenhaal's description. The grainy CCTV footage showed Kellen and a man, presumed to be Gyllenhaal, arriving at the motel. Kellen looked exhausted and disoriented, his clothing torn and covered in dirt. The man, wearing a baseball cap and a jacket, seemed calm and collected as he registered for a room. It was a breakthrough, a visual confirmation that Kellen had indeed made it out of the wilderness, but it also raised a chilling question. What happened after they left the motel? The footage showed the two men leaving the motel together several hours later, getting into a dark-colored sedan and driving away. The license plate was partially obscured, but the investigators were able to enhance the image and run it through the DMV database. The vehicle was registered to Xavier Gyllenhaal. The circle was closing. The motel footage became the cornerstone of the investigation. It confirmed Gyllenhaal's presence in the area, his encounter with Kellen, and his subsequent departure with the weakened survivalist. The next step was to locate Gyllenhaal and bring him in for questioning. The investigators learned he had returned to Belgium shortly after Kellen's disappearance. They initiated extradition proceedings, but the process was slow and complicated. In the meantime, they delved deeper into Gyllenhaal's background, uncovering his connection to the illegal ginseng trade. They interviewed former associates, informants, and even a few disgruntled poachers who had crossed paths with Gyllenhaal. The picture that emerged was one of a ruthless and calculating individual, willing to do whatever it took to protect his illicit business. Gyllenhaal was not just a nature enthusiast with an interest in herbal remedies. He was a criminal, a poacher, and potentially a killer. The theory that took shape was grim but plausible. Kellen, weakened and disoriented, had stumbled upon ginseng operation. Gyllenhaal, fearing exposure, had offered him assistance, luring him to the motel under false pretenses. Once they were alone, Gyllenhaal had silenced Kellen, disposing of his body in a remote location where it would never be found. The specialized batteries found at the campsite were evidence of Gyllenhaal's involvement, powering his GPS unit and communication equipment. The hidden map was Kellen's desperate attempt to leave a trail, a testament to his will to survive. The extradition process finally concluded, and Gyllenhaal was brought back to the United States to face questioning. The interrogation was intense, a battle of wits between the seasoned investigators and the cold, calculating suspect. Gyllenhaal maintained his innocence, sticking to his original story. He claimed he had simply given Kellen a ride to the nearest town, dropping him off at a bus station where he could start a new life. He denied any involvement in the illegal ginseng trade, dismissing the allegations as baseless rumors. He portrayed himself as a good Samaritan, a traveler who had simply offered assistance to a man in need. But the investigators didn't buy it. They presented him with the CCTV footage, the evidence of his lies, and the testimonies of his former associates. They pressed him relentlessly, probing for weaknesses in his story. Gyllenhaal remained unfazed. He was a master manipulator, a skilled liar who knew how to play the system. He offered explanations for every inconsistency, deflecting the accusations with practiced ease. In the end, the investigators were forced to admit defeat. They had a strong suspicion that Gyllenhaal was responsible for Kellen's disappearance, but they lacked the concrete evidence needed to secure a conviction. There was no body, no murder weapon, no confession. The case was circumstantial, based on assumptions and inferences, without more definitive proof. the district attorney's office declined to press charges. Gyllenhaal was released, free to walk away from the mystery he had created. He returned to Belgium, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family shattered by grief. The investigation into Kellen Pogue's disappearance reached a dead end. The wilderness had yielded its secrets, only to reveal a truth that was just beyond reach. The second person, the enigmatic Xavier Gyllenhaal, had slipped through the cracks, taking the final piece of the puzzle with him. The case remained open, a cold case shrouded in mystery and uncertainty. The name Kellen Pogue became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, both in the wilderness and at the edge of civilization. Dashel Pogue never found closure. He was left haunted by the image of his brother, the expert survivalist, succumbing not to the elements, but to the treachery of another human being. The Ozarks held its secrets close, its silent expanse forever concealing the truth about what happened to Kellen Pogue. The investigation into Xavier Gyllenhaal reached a legal stalemate. Despite the intense scrutiny and the investigators' firm belief that he was responsible for Kellen Pogue's disappearance, the lack of direct physical evidence proved insurmountable. Without a body, a confession, or a definitive link between Gyllenhaal and a crime, the district attorney's office declined to press charges. The aftermath of this decision was swift and predictable. Shortly after the investigation concluded without charges, Xavier Gyllenhaal left the United States. He returned to his home country of Belgium, shielded by international borders and a legal system that prioritized concrete evidence over circumstantial suspicion. This move made further investigation exceedingly difficult. Extradition for questioning in a missing person case, especially one lacking concrete evidence, was virtually impossible. The primary suspect had slipped away, taking the answers with him, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a profound sense of injustice. Dashel Pogue was left to grapple with the devastating implications of the investigation's failure. The legal system, designed to uphold justice, had seemingly failed his brother, prioritizing the rights of a suspected criminal over the desperate search for truth. Dashel meticulously reviewed the evidence, poring over every detail, searching for a missed clue, an overlooked inconsistency that might break the case open. He spent countless hours with the investigators, dissecting Gyllenhaal's account, probing for weaknesses and challenging the official narrative, but the authorities were constrained by the boundaries of the law, bound by the need for irrefutable proof. The circumstantial evidence, the specialized batteries, Gyllenhaal's suspected involvement in the ginseng trade, the CCTV footage, and the timing of his departure all pointed towards guilt, but fell short of establishing it beyond a reasonable doubt. The narrative that emerged from the investigation suggested a complex and agonizing scenario. Kellen, the expert survivalist, had likely suffered a catastrophic accident at the Overlook, losing his primary gear, but surviving the initial incident. He then endured a prolonged period of survival in the wilderness, demonstrating incredible resilience and resourcefulness, leaving desperate messages, the turtle, the etching, the hidden map, as he fought to stay alive. All while weakened by accidental poisoning and starvation. He had overcome impossible odds, navigating treacherous terrain, foraging for food, and battling the elements. He was within reach of safety and civilization, almost home free. He just needed to get to the main road, the Forest Service road, the place where he could hopefully hitchhike to safety. He had endured pain that most people couldn't even imagine, driven by a need to reconnect with the world. He eventually encountered Gyllenhaal at the edge of the forest. The timing, the location, and Gyllenhaal's suspected activities converged to create a chilling possibility. Whether this encounter was initially a rescue or an abduction remains unclear, but the evidence strongly suggests that Gyllenhaal, motivated by the need to protect his illegal ginseng smuggling operation, ultimately decided that Kellen was a liability. Kellen, with his expertise and his knowledge of the area, posed a significant threat. He could have identified Gyllenhaal's accomplices, exposed his smuggling routes, and brought the entire operation crashing down. The prevailing theory among investigators and the Pogue family is that Gyllenhaal murdered Kellen shortly after leaving the motel, disposing of his body in a location where it would never be found, a secluded spot deep within the Ozarks, hidden from the eyes of the world, a place where the wilderness would keep its secrets forever. Without Kellen's remains or definitive proof of a crime, the case remains inactive. a cold case file gathering dust in a forgotten corner of the police archive, a haunting reminder of the justice that was never served. Dashiell Pogue never found closure. He is haunted by the image of his brother, the expert survivalist, surviving the unforgiving wilderness, overcoming impossible odds, only to vanish after encountering the stranger at the edge of civilization. The irony was agonizing. Kellen had prepared for every conceivable scenario in the wilderness, mastering the art of survival, understanding the dangers of the natural world. But he was unprepared for the evil that lurked just beyond the tree line, the threat that wore a human face, the danger that came not from nature, but from greed and desperation. Dashiell's grief was compounded by a deep sense of guilt. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed his brother, that he could have done more to help him, that he should have been there for him. He replayed the events leading up to Kellen's disappearance, scrutinizing every decision, every missed opportunity, searching for a way to rewrite history. He questioned his decision to cancel the trip, wondering if his presence would have changed the outcome. He second-guessed his advice, wondering if he had inadvertently steered Kellen towards danger. He blamed himself for not pushing the investigation harder, for not uncovering the truth sooner. The weight of these burdens pressed down on him, threatening to suffocate him. The Ozarks kept its final secret buried deep within its silent expanse. The dense forests, the hidden caves, and the treacherous terrain guarded the truth, obscuring the location of Kellen's final resting place. The wilderness remained indifferent to human suffering, a vast and unforgiving landscape that offered no solace, no answers, and no peace. Dashiell continued to search, driven by a desperate hope that defied logic and reason. He returned to the Ozarks time and again, walking the trails, exploring the remote areas, and questioning the locals. He became a familiar face in the small towns and villages, a persistent reminder of the unsolved mystery. He clung to the belief that one day he would find his brother, that he would uncover the truth, and that he would finally bring closure to this agonizing chapter of his life. But as the years passed, the hope dwindled, replaced by a quiet resignation. The reality of Kellen's fate settled upon him like a shroud, a constant reminder of the brother he had lost and the justice that had been denied. Kellen Pogue's disappearance became a chilling legend in the Ozarks, a cautionary tale whispered among hikers, hunters, and locals, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wilderness, both natural and human. The story served as a warning about the fragility of life, the power of greed, and the enduring mystery of the unknown. The frayed rope, the empty ravine, the turtle with the etched coordinates, the deserted campsites, the grainy CCTV footage, and the elusive Xavier Gyllenhaal became haunting symbols of the unsolved case, a constant reminder of the brother lost and the truth that remained hidden. The search for Kellen Pogue ended, but the mystery endured, etched into the landscape and imprinted on the memories of those who knew and loved him. The Ozarks whispered his name, a haunting echo in the silent wilderness, a chilling testament to the enduring power of the unknown. And Dashiell Pogue was left to live with the uncertainty, the grief, and the chilling possibility that his brother survived the wilderness, only to be betrayed at its edge, a betrayal that would forever haunt the edges of his soul.